Hey everyone, welcome to Judging for the Win. I'm Dave, and this is my daily ruling. You know, from time to time, something will happen in the Magic community, and I'll get a bunch of requests to cover some specific topic all at once. And so, in a nod to my earlier habit of posting policy and philosophy DDRs on Saturday, I'm coming to you today to answer a question that a lot of people have had on their minds recently. Are prize splits legal? Along the way, I'll talk about intentional draws and concessions in Magic tournaments, what you can and cannot say or ask for one, and the overall philosophy behind this important area of policy. Ready? Let's get started. And we'll start with some relatively straightforward examples and work our way up. First, let's say that Amy and Nick are both playing grindy control decks. Amy wins game 1 in 25 minutes, and Nick closes out game 2 in 20 minutes. With only 5 minutes left on the round clock, both players acknowledge that they have little chance of winning game 3 and agree to a draw so that they can get a drink/smoke/bathroom break in before the next round. This is allowed. Players are permitted to intentionally draw a game or match at any time. There are some rules around what you can and can't say that might influence someone's decision to do this, but in this case there's nothing suspicious about the circumstances presented in the original problem statement. For those of you who only have experience with Magic, this answer probably isn't too surprising since it's a relatively common occurrence in our tournaments. But my understanding is that some other TCGs actually don't allow any intentional draws at all, so you can see how different this sort of policy can be from game to game. If anyone from the comments section has any experience with any other card games, I'd be really interested to know how this or other scenarios that we'll talk about might be handled according to their policy documents. Okay, next up, let's say that Amy and Nick are paired against each other in the last Swiss round before the cut to the top 8, and Amy has been paired down. That is, her record is better than Nick's. Usually the pairing algorithm always pairs people with opponents that have equal records, but some amount of pair downs are inevitable unless the number of players and the match results end up working out very nicely. In this case, Amy and Nick have worked out that Amy will probably make the top 8, but only if she wins this match, whereas Nick is unlikely to do so even with a win. Since Amy and Nick are friends, Nick decides to concede the match to Amy so that she can go on to the top 8. Is this allowed? And again, the answer is yes. Just like players can intentionally draw, it is allowed for players to concede a game or match at any time. And in fact, it's relatively common for players in Nick's position to concede even if they don't know their opponents, and even if they won or were clearly going to win a match, just as a matter of etiquette. This is the first spot where I want to talk about stuff that can go wrong though. Because one of the things you're not allowed to do is to try to pressure or threaten your opponent into conceding. You can ask, you can point out that a win helps you a lot more than it helps them, but in the end it has to be a free choice just because they're nice. How about this? Let's say in the situation from before, Amy asks for a courtesy scoop and Nick says no, because this tournament pays out to the top 16, which he can still make if he wins. Amy then offers Nick $50 to scoop to her, which is the same as what the prize for 9th through 16th place will get. Is this allowed? And I hope it shouldn't be very controversial to say that Amy cannot do this. One other big rule about drawing and conceding is that it cannot be done in exchange for or influenced by any offer or any sort of reward or incentive. Such an offer is called bribery. It's also considered bribery if the offer is intended to influence a player's in-game decisions, such as whether or not to attack with a specific creature, for example, or the decision of a judge or any other tournament official. We'll come back to this principle again and again, so take a moment to read through the official wording from the policy document here. Well, how about this? Amy and Nick are paired against each other as before, and as a judge, you see Amy and Nick talking, but you can't hear exactly what they're saying. Then, you see Nick enter an 0-2 loss into his phone, and Amy clicks confirm. After that, you see Amy pull a $50 bill out of her pocket and hand it to Nick. What do? Well, this scenario illustrates one of the principal difficulties of a judge's job. It's true that Nick might have legitimately wanted to concede to Amy irrespective of any sort of reward, and it's true that there are innocuous reasons why Amy might have handed Nick $50 that have absolutely nothing to do with the current Magic tournament. Like maybe he spotted her some money at dinner last night and she's just paying him back. But with that said, a judge's job is to uphold the integrity of the event, and that means handing out the appropriate penalties if an infraction has been committed. This is one case where it's definitely possible that Amy has committed an infraction where the correct penalty would be for a DQ to happen, and the same thing goes for Nick. Unfortunately, many of the infractions related to this aspect of policy are defined based on what the players are thinking, which is impossible to conclusively determine. It is certain that Nick conceded the match, and it is certain that Amy handed Nick $50. The players are only guilty of bribery if Nick's decision to concede was influenced by Amy's implicit or explicit offer of a reward. You could ask the players what they were talking about, but they're probably not stupid enough to admit that they were negotiating how much it would cost for Nick to scoop. So the judge has to investigate and determine what is most likely based on the facts that they are able to uncover. Being realistic, the judge is lucky to have actually even seen the $50. Much more likely would be if the judge only heard them talking about it or got a report from another player who claims to have heard such a conversation. So anyway, that's a very real practical problem for the judge. It's very unlikely that you will ever have all the facts of a case, so as a judge, you need to be able to create a mental narrative that does the best job of explaining all the facts that you do have. Sometimes that means you will get things wrong and your mental narrative will not line up with reality, leading to assessment of a penalty against a player who didn't do anything wrong. Any decent judge is acutely aware of this possibility and will tell you that it sucks, but it's more or less unavoidable. The takeaway for the players in the audience is to know that it is possible that a judge will rule against you when the only thing that you did wrong was being part of some suspicious circumstances. So let's talk about the other major thing that you're not allowed to do. Amy and Nick are in the last Swiss round, and their records are such that whichever one of them wins will make it to the top 8. Unfortunately, the game is looking like it's going to be a draw, in which case neither of them will make it. Rather than have both of them miss out, Amy suggests that they roll a die to decide who will win their match. And like we said, this is not allowed either. The reason is because Magic tournaments are meant to be games of skill, not games of chance. Ever since the very beginning of Magic, where tournaments involving ante were determined to be legally problematic, that is a boundary Magic tournament organizers have been very aware of. For a similar reason, the ban on gambling extends to betting on any part of a game, match, or tournament. Now, one thing that a lot of people have been talking about recently is equity splits. This is an arrangement where one person buys a stake in another person's tournament equity. If the latter player does well in the tournament, some previously agreed upon portion of that player's prizes will be given to the former person. If Amy is a skilled Magic player, she might want to enter into such an arrangement in order to make her tournament results a little bit more consistent. Since Magic has a lot of variance, it might make better sense to her to give up some significant fraction of her occasional big wins in order to get guaranteed money. The problem is that an arrangement where I pay you $10 right now on the premise that if you win the tournament, you'll pay me $100 sure does sound an awful lot like placing a bet on that tournament, doesn't it? Remember what we were talking about earlier about how sometimes the players have to take responsibility for not being suspicious. Well, that includes not doing things that are clearly equivalent to things that are specifically against the rules, even if they do have a fancy poker name for them. Well, so far we've talked about a lot of the stuff that you can't do, but if you've been playing Magic in tournaments for a while, then you know that there are also some things that you can do. So let's take a look at some of the things that are explicitly allowed in the rules regarding prize splits. The first is that if there's only 2 people left in the finals of a tournament, they can divide the tournament prizes between themselves however they want, and they can decide which of them will win. I guess the rationale here is that if there's only 2 people left in the tournament, then anything that they both agree on must be fair. How can they disrupt the tournament integrity if they're the whole tournament? If you've played in RCQ before, this probably sounds familiar. Certainly, there always tends to be a discussion like this at the ones that I've judged. Another one that you might be familiar with if you're a regular tournament player is that if you're in the single elimination portion of a tournament, all the remaining players may agree to split the prizes evenly with the TO's consent. Officially, this only applies for events where the prize purse contains only cash, store credit, prize stakes, and booster packs, but many organizers extend the logic to events with other types of prizes too, by posing a vote to players where they are asked if they'd like to divide the splittable prizes evenly and play only for the unsplittable ones. Now, the last one is the one that I think that people can get the most confused about. It is not bribery when players share prizes they have not yet received in the current tournament, and they may agree to do so before or during their match. And this is what I think most people are referring to when they talk about a prize split. Such a split is legal with the caveat that it cannot occur in exchange for any match result. So let's talk about how this policy applies to some example scenarios. First, let's say that we have some people playing in a tournament where first place gets a Cadillac Eldorado and second place gets a set of steak knives, with the remaining players getting nothing. Well, maybe 3 of the tournament participants all know each other. Those 3 could enter into an agreement among themselves that each of them will have an equal ownership share in whatever prizes any of them win. Alright, now here's another one. Let's say that Amy and Nick are in the last Swiss round of an RCQ before cutting to the top 8. Amy only wants the invitation and doesn't care about the cash prizes, whereas Nick doesn't care about going to the Pro Tour, he just wants the cash prizes. Amy might want to make an offer to Nick where Nick will get any cash that the two of them might earn if he gives her the invitation. But this does not work. The invitation goes to the winner of the tournament. That's how the tournament works. A split like this is tantamount to Amy asking Nick to concede to her in exchange for some amount of money, which we already said is against the rules. If they wanted to agree that whichever of them won the match would give the first X dollars of their prizes to the loser in order to soften the blow, that would be illegal because they're sharing the prizes without any expectation that the split will lead to a specific winner or loser. On the other hand, let's say that Amy made that exact offer to Nick, and then Nick immediately scooped because he and Amy know each other and they both understand that Amy cares about making it to the pro tour and Nick doesn't. See, this is another time where people can get themselves into trouble. A lot of players seem to think there's some sort of magical way to phrase offers like these where if you word it the right way, you can't get in trouble. But that's complete bunk. The fact is that if the judge believes that you're making an offer of a prize split and part of that offer includes a specific game or match result, it doesn't matter whether you verbalize that connection or not. Such an offer is not allowed. The only reason that people think that there's a right way to make one is that it's worked for them in the past. In reality, a lot of judges are actually pretty hesitant to pull the trigger in cases like this, which means people get away with this sort of thing a lot more often than they probably should. And unfortunately, that can lead to some people getting hurt later when they go to a different tournament with a different judge. Now, the best way to do anything like this is to avoid doing anything suspicious at all. But the second best way is that if you're ever unsure about what you can or cannot say or offer, call for a judge first and ask for their advice. That way, you know that you're going to be on the up and up. And speaking of calling for a judge, let's talk about something else that I've been hearing a lot of recently. Let's say that you're peacefully and unsuspiciously playing your win and in match, and a spectator runs up and yells at you, "I'll give you $5 to throw the match." Then that spectator laughs at you because of that brilliant plan, which has just made you guilty of bribery and managed to get the spectator's friend a free ticket to the finals. Meanwhile, the head judge sighs, leading you off in handcuffs for your overt attempted rule breaking, muttering a gruff, "When will they learn?" under his breath. Okay, I get that that was a little over the top, but you don't understand. I actually have to read statements online from people who are talking like this sort of thing would actually work. Of course it doesn't. There's one weird trick that will get you off scot-free in cases like this, and that is, say it with me everybody, to call a judge. Yes, anytime someone makes an offer to do something against the rules, you can get off with no penalties if you call a judge right away and tell them about it. If the judge thinks that you considered, solicited, or entertained such an offer, you will be getting a penalty, but just hearing one is not against the rules. But you should report it or else you might face the same consequences. To close out, I want to recognize that this is a tough topic for players. It's a tough topic for judges too. Unfortunately, the stakes are necessarily high on both sides. The penalty for doing most of this stuff is a match loss, and that's if you somehow didn't know it was against the rules. Disqualification is what it would be if you did. No one wants to be disqualified, and no judge wants to let someone go who should have been disqualified, nor DQ someone who didn't deserve it. Unfortunately, the fact that the most relevant information for these investigations often exists only in the players' minds makes this an inexact science at best. I'd like to apologize as a judge to any player who's ever ended up on the wrong side of this one, and exhort my fellow judges to do their best to accept these responsibilities with grace and class. But that's all I have for you today. Hopefully, this has answered any questions anyone might have had about prize splits and related issues. Join me again next time for another Daily Ruling. Until then, I hope you have a great day.